Okay, thank you. So I'll just give you guys a short bio of her incredible accomplishments. Yoruba Richen is an Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker. Her work includes How It Feels to Be Free and the sit-in Harry Belafonte hosts The Tonight Show. She directed the award-winning series Black and Missing for HBO and High on the Hog for Netflix. Yoruba is the co-director of American Reckoning, which aired on PBS's Frontline, and The Killing of Breonna Taylor, which won an NAACP Image Award. Her previous films, The New Black and Promised Land, won multiple festival awards before airing on Independent Lens and POV. Yoruba is also a past Guggenheim and Fulbright Fellow, casual, and a recipient of the Chicken and Egg Breakthrough Filmmakers Award. She's the founding director of the documentary program at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY. Welcome.
Thank you.
I want to kick us off, and then I'll open it up for questions for you all. Once again, thank you so much for making this film. I didn't know what I was missing, and I guess I'll start off by asking you, what were your perceptions of Rosa Parks before you started making this film, and what are they now?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you guys for coming out tonight and watching the film. I think my perception of Rosa Parks was pretty limited before I started on this project. One thing that I was aware of, and it was actually because of another documentary film that I saw, was that that she was an investigator for the NAACP investigating sexual violence against Black women. And I discovered that only a few years before through a documentary about Reese Taylor, who we talk about in the film. And that was, really eye-opening to me. But that was kind of it in terms of knowing, more about who she was and her activism. And when my co-director, how I got started on this project, my co-director, Johanna Hamilton, had connected with the author of the book, Jeanne Theoharis, who wrote the book, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. And every year on her birthday, on Rosa Parks' birthday, which just passed, her 110th birthday, just happened on Saturday, February 4th, Jeanne puts out a Twitter thread saying, detailing all the things that Rosa Parks, that you should know, that you most likely don't know about Rosa Parks. And my co-director read the thread, and this is like Twitter, acting in a good way for finally. She read the thread and said, oh my gosh, I did not know this about her, and connected with Jeanne and found out that there had been no documentary, that full-length documentary about Mrs. Parks. And Johanna then contacted me, told me this. I was, shocked as well, read the book, and was also amazed about all that I didn't know about her. And so Joanna and I set off to make the film. I immediately thought that this was a story that needed to be told, a story whose time has come. And that's how we started.
I'm going to plead my own ignorance, because when I found out that you made this film, and I was so excited, my first thought was, I was like, well, why now? I mean, there must be like millions of films made about her life, so what makes things different now in 2022? Why do we need to, reconsider the story? And then it turns out the narrative has never been fully told. And for a lot of different ways that kind of harm history and culture and education, like the kind of narrowing and the flattening of her story is quite tragic to me. I want to relate it back to kind of how we think about, at the Center for Gender and Sexuality Law, how we think about gender and gender equality, women's rights. To us, kind of, you can't really separate out gender and race when we're talking about this. And one of the things that we're thinking about right now is how advancements in gender equality laws are weighted differently with women of color and white women, right? And so to kind of see her only as a sort of a racial justice, civil rights activist, when she's done so many groundbreaking things in gender justice. Reese Taylor, let's see, I looked up this kind of background on this case. So she mobilized national support to bring justice for Reese Taylor. She did it with labor unions, the African American organizations, women's groups, and she formed this Alabama Committee for Equal Justice for Mrs. Reese Taylor. And the perpetrators were unfortunately never brought to justice, but that mobilization of the Black community in Alabama actually set up later on the social and political networks that enabled the success of the bus boycott in Montgomery a decade later. And so that, like, talk to me about all of these connections and that her life's work was so rich and important and completely underseen.
Absolutely. You know, the other part about the groups that you mentioned that mobilized for Reese Taylor were also the Communist Party. And the connection between Black Southern activists and the Communist Party, you know, the mostly white Communist Party, was very strong. And part of it, in terms of the bus boycott, part of the reason, I mean, we didn't get so much into this in the film, but if you remember that as the boycott was happening, there was also the legal case, right? Of the, you know, that Ed Nixon was putting forth in terms of the courts. And Mrs. Parks wasn't on that case. And part of the reason was because of fear that her activism, work with the Communist Party, work on, you know, these very, you know, I guess controversial issues would not be good for the case. So, you know, that's also some of the consequences of her work. But absolutely, these networks that she formed around Reese Taylor during the Scottsboro Boys and the organizing around that. And this was all in the 40s. You know, this is when, like, terrorism, white terrorism, was a daily, you know, a daily thing that, you know, she says in the film, I don't even want to tell you about some of the stuff we had to face. You know, going down in the South, investigating, interviewing Reese, investigating these cases in the 1940s. So the risk that she was taking in order to you know, reveal and expose and fight for justice around Black women who'd been violated, sexually assaulted and violated and raped. And then in the film, we also jump ahead to her work around the Joanne Little case. And Joanne Little, that was in the 70s, and that became a big cause célèbre for Black activists, Black female activists as well. And Joanne Little subsequently became the first woman to be acquitted for self-defense in, you know, in defending themselves against their rapists.
Just incredible. And when I think about Reese Taylor, I mean, that was in the 40s, so that predates kind of the second wave feminist movement of documenting, reporting violence against women, using law enforcement for better or for worse.
Well, I mean, I just have to say, as I'm sure many of you know, right, the sexual violence against Black women was something that was, you know, widespread, to say the least, since we were brought here as slaves, right? And it was also something that was not talked about, minimized, ignored. And in fact, the trope, you know, and the way these tropes work, and the way race and racism and patriarchy and criminal justice, right, is that Black men were the rapists of white women. And that's what became the you know, the narrative. When you know, the actual rapes and assaults of Black women were ignored.
Incredible. So I want to talk about this idea of, like, excavating alternative histories when we're talking about figures, especially women of color, kind of giants in the civil rights fields. I think about Rosa Parks, but I also think about Pauline Murray, who is a, you know, architect of the civil rights and the women's rights movement, and who's thinking, writing, analysis informed the strategy for Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and also undercredited, and spent their whole life doing this work. And also, you know, Hansa Mehta, who's an activist and a writer from India, who rewrote parts of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to change men, all men, to all humans. So, and meanwhile, Eleanor Roosevelt was given full credit for writing that text. So that kind of revisionist history, I mean, what's your take on that as a filmmaker of this kind of film? And kind of moving forward, right? Like, how does this film continue to kind of like have staying power in our imaginations?
Absolutely. I mean, you really nailed it in terms of excavating the history. I mean, that's part of the reason I do the work that I do, is that just, you mentioned a couple of women of color whose full story and full contribution to human rights is unknown or hasn't been fully revealed or talked about or in, widespread. And there's so many more. We're only now beginning to talk about this stuff, and only now beginning to look at the role of women, particularly in the Black freedom struggle. And I think that the film has staying power as what we call journalists evergreen, journalism calls it evergreen, because, one, it's interesting that, everyone knows her name, but no one knows her story. So there's like a real interest in it from all different, facets of viewers and audiences. But also too, as we know, we're in a situation now in this country where there's an effort to ban history and to ban or to make illegal history that makes us uncomfortable or makes certain people uncomfortable. We think this film couldn't have come at a more important time because of that, because it's a counter to that. And there's a hunger for it. There's a hunger. We have a very big education campaign. We're working with the Zinn Education Project. And we have schools all over the country that are using the book and the film in their curriculum. And as I said, there's a hunger for this kind of, from everybody. This is our history. Who wouldn't want to know their history, So I think that will, that hunger is very real. And this film is being used to understand who we are as Americans, as a people.
Right, so we'll take some questions from the audience.
Okay, so I was born in 1961, and I'm 61, and I guess I had two questions. One is about other women, because I know some names, but not that many. Like, I know there's Zora, but I can't think of her last name. My wife mentioned her.
Zora Neale Hurston.
And I know there's Angela.
Davis.
Right. And I know there's like Emmett Till's mother, right? So
Maybe Till.
So when you said Fannie Lou
Hamer.
I don't know anything about her.
Well, it's funny, all these women that you just mentioned, there actually are documentaries about them. So there's a recent, I'll just give you quickly so you can look up. There just a couple weeks ago, a film about Zora Neale Hurston premiered on American Experience on PBS, which you can see. Yeah, Pauli Murray.
My name is Pauli Murray.
Yeah, my name is Pauli
Amazon.
Murray, and that was made by a professor, former professor here. She ran the documentary program at Columbia. Great film. Fannie Lou Hamer, there's a PBS film about her. So this, and hopefully this kind of watching a film like this can give exactly that. Who are these other women? Who are these other stories that, that I want to know about and foster that kind of curiosity about our history.
And then my second question is, I have a daughter in college, and she hardly listens to me. But, now that a lot of corporations are laying off, which is kind of cool because we're entrepreneurs, and you can see that, your whole life that you thought you were going to plan to be at blank blank is not. Maybe it's there. Gender studies, film stuff, didn't seem like something worth taking a class on to me, right? And now I look at, like, you're a director of film, and this is apparently a gender studies, and I wouldn't know what that is. What do you think are, like, some ways what would be a good class for her to take? She's in liberal arts, if she were taking a class in general studies.
Well, I mean, I was a political science major, which meant that I took everything, English, history, theater. I was a theater person. I think basically, at least as a filmmaker, you can, it's, what's wonderful about it, your interests can span so much, right? And you can go where where your drive and where your curiosity takes you and discover what it is. So that's what I would advise to someone who is in college now.
That's a great answer. Well, I mean, we were talking out there about what it's like to teach, a class at CUNY documentary film, and it's like, it could be anything. It starts with a passion to tell a story, and then you have to tell the story in your own voice and like with your own motivations, right?
And figure out how you're going to tell it, how you're going to fund it, how you're going to, how it's going to be relevant if it's a historical film. How is it relevant to audiences today?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and it's really been great to see your film and with my daughter.
Yay!
Really, she actually got a Rosa Parks Barbie as a kid, which I didn't know.
That just came out.
Stop embarrassing her.
Speaking of Barbies, my question was, you highlighted in your comments the role of the communists, right, and the relationship between African American struggles and the communists in the U.S. I was curious as to what was Rosa Parks' ideas around communism or communist revolutions or the Cuban Revolution.
I don't know that. We didn't come across her ideas around it. We do know that she and Raymond worked with the U.S. Folks in the U.S. Communist Party here on the Scottsboro case and on Reese. I didn't come across that, so I can't really comment on that. I'm sure she was supportive of a lot of it, though. Oh, okay. So Reese Taylor, just briefly, was a woman in Alabama in early 1940s who was raped by a group of white men and told not to report it, they'd kill her. And she went to the police and did report it. Nothing happened to the men, the boys, young men who raped her, and the Rosa Parks was sent down to investigate. The case started to get attention. Rosa Parks went down to investigate, and as Ting Ting said, there was a group of activists who formed a committee to try to get justice for Reese. Unfortunately, it never happened. But Reese Taylor only died a couple years ago. And there's a documentary about her called The Rape of Reese Taylor, which you can also check out.
I don't know, I find myself feeling frustrated. Feel like her nature was, she was about the work and living her own dignity and not about getting the credit or being out in front, right?
Yeah, that's exactly.
And you really respected, when you told the story, you respected her nature. It wasn't about getting activists to show up and kind of like narrate her work in today's terms of branding and visibility, and the revolution has to happen on social media. Like, she just is not about that.
Yeah, the couple of things about that. One of the things in terms of the storytelling is that we decided that we wanted the film to be in her own words as much as possible. So, using her interviews, audio tapes, and words, letters that she written, which we had the actress Lisa Gay narrating. And we wanted it to be in her own words, which also meant that there was stuff that guided us to, what we couldn't include, because she didn't talk about everything. So if she didn't talk about it, then we most likely didn't include it. And you're right, her nature, her personality was not boastful. And the press only asked her about Montgomery. So when she was worked in John Conyers' office in Detroit, in the heat of everything that was going on, she was only asked about the boycott. So there's, I think it was personality, I think it was the fact that, that's what she had been reduced to, and she wasn't a boastful person. It was also, I'm sure, having to do with, what women were expected of in terms of, what they could talk about in terms of their accomplishments, that was part of it as well. But that definitely, I think, helped to, to minimize her significant role.
But what your documentary makes clear is that she was a strategist, and she contributed as a leader strategy on basically every single thing that she engaged in.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
She didn't just show up to document and report a crime against a black woman. She then created strategy around it,
Yes.
and engaged the media, and had
Yes.
this kind of public movement
That's
around it.
right.
So that's almost like an overt act of erasing her, like taking something away from her accomplishments, right?
Yeah.
So like, how do you square the two? The fact is that people didn't give her enough respect, give her the due, and describe her accomplishments in a full way.
Right.
And maybe just sort of, I don't know, used her as a figurehead for
Yeah.
their own ends, right?
Well,
But then there's also her nature, which
Right.
needs to be respected.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there is, excuse me, so there are so many women in the freedom struggle, in the black freedom struggle, who are minimized. It was, what is that famous quote? I think it was one of the Black Panthers, what, a woman's role in the movement is prone, or something, a woman's position in the movement is prone. That was the viewpoint of what, from a lot of people, of what women's role was in the movement. I mean, that's the patriarchy. That was the patriarchy in our own civil rights, black freedom struggle movement, and it was real. And it minimized women like Rosa Parks in terms of their strategy, in terms of their thinking about, their thinking of around activism and protests and around the freedom struggle.
What I want to close out, because it's getting late, and I appreciate everyone staying for the Q&A, but I guess I want to know about what it means to you to be a documentarian today with your politics. We go way back. We both worked at Democracy Now!, trying to stir some things up. But yeah, and then also I'm curious about kind of what do you see in terms of where are we with kind of that intersectional conversation between race and patriarchy and gender today?
So for me personally, I mean, the reason why I got into documentary film, I found my way into it, and it was a desire to empower communities like mine to tell our own stories. I grew up here in New York. I grew up uptown, not far from here in Harlem. I went to a private school on the Upper East Side for the first 9 years of my life, and I took a bus every day where I passed the dividing line, what was then the dividing line of 96th Street, and saw the inequality, this was in the 80s, experience how my community did not have the power of the people in comparison to the people that I went to school with, and that really just shaped my ideas around equity and justice and wanting to be a storyteller. My mom was also a playwright, so I grew up in the theater. And so documentary was kind of the perfect thing for me because it encapsulates, it is about storytelling, it is about, for me, empowering communities to tell their own story and articulate their own history. And yeah, that's what it means to me. What was your other question?
Where are we at with patriarchy and race
where are
and
we at with
gender today?
patriarchy?
Just to close out on a light note.
Well, I will say, on a positive note, I think we are really talking about stuff, even in my lifetime, that, we haven't talked about, and looking at intersectionality. We just saw Kimberly Crenshaw walking the halls.
And you're working on the film.
Yeah, another project. But really talking about these issues in a way that, I think we haven't never talked about. And I think that's why we're getting the pushback, right? That's why they're trying to ban talking about it. I mean, what did they banned the word intersectionality from that AP course, right? So I see that that's happening because it's happening, So at the very least, it's a discussion that, is a discussion that is happening on a level that it hasn't happened before, looking at the intersection between race, racism, patriarchy, sexism, reproductive justice, all of those issues.
Okay, so we will be sending out a follow-up email with lots of resources connected to the film, this education project, our organization, and we hope you guys keep in touch. Thank you for coming. I want to thank Yoruba once again. This film is truly groundbreaking and
Thank you.
life-changing for me, so I want to thank you for making it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.